Work Wellness Institute is transforming research into workplace performance and health. As an organization, we function throughout the complete cycle of turning research into practice, mobilizing knowledge as a research institute, community partner, funder, and educational provider. Our mission of creating safe, healthy, and inclusive workplaces for all is our driving motivation. Learning is a lifelong journey to adapt to the forever changing needs of the workplace. Whether you are a leader, a professional, an academic, or a student, we provide high-quality resources that are evidence-based, topical, and relevant to all industries. Choose the Work Wellness Institute as your learning journey partner and become a member to gain full access to our diverse knowledge mobilization programming, including lectures on demand, e-curriculum, 3 distinct certification opportunities, and more. Continue to learn and connect with the Work Wellness Institute and see how we can support transforming research into performance and health for your workplace.
Official welcome to our audience today, and a very good morning, perhaps afternoon, perhaps even evening, depending where you may be joining us from today. A welcome to everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join with us today for our session on endometriosis and its impact on women's career progression. My name is Elizabeth White, and I am the manager of programs with the Work Wellness Institute, and I'm here today to help host and moderate in today's session. I will start by acknowledging that I have the privilege to live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. This webinar is made possible through the support of our funders, partners, as well as memberships to the Work Wellness Institute. And of course, I would like to take a moment to thank our advisory committees as well as our speakers who contribute to this webinar series. And of course, without them, we would not have this. So always want to have a special thank you to the speakers who contribute to this series. And introduce our speakers, PhD candidates Marlee, Mercer, and Tina Sharifi. Marlee is a PhD candidate, as I just mentioned, in the Human Resources Management Department at York University. Her dissertation focuses on abusive supervision, identity work, and their impacts on employee motivation and goal setting. Her research also explores women's health in the workplace with a particular focus on endometriosis, today's topic, as well as strategic HR practices. She brings extensive experience as an HR generalist across industries, including manufacturing, banking, private equity, and infrastructure, and is a consultant specializing in compensation strategies. She has taught human resource management courses at multiple post-secondary institutions and has co-authored and edited several HR and compensation textbooks. And along with our second presentation speaker today, Tina Sharifi, they have won the Best Doctoral Paper Together award for their research on endometriosis in the workplace. And speaking of Tina, again, she's a PhD candidate in the Human Resources Management Department at York University as well. Her research focuses on intersectionality in women's leadership, authenticity, calling, and the human-animal bond, topics she has presented and published at numerous national and international academic conferences. Her dissertation examines the authentic leadership practices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color women entrepreneurs who view their work as a calling. She brings over 9 years of professional and consulting experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as talent acquisition, in addition to teaching a variety of human resources management courses at the post-secondary level. So we're so glad to have you both here. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm very happy to pass things over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So today we're going to be talking about endometriosis in the workplace, specifically related to the effects and symptoms that lead with endometriosis. We also want to discuss the stigma, the gendered implications, and the history of misdiagnosis and misunderstanding related to the condition, all of which lead to performance issues for women who are trying to function in the workplace. We also identify some resources as well as in particular some support mechanisms that might help women progress in their career. So again, my name is Marlee Mercer, and this is Tina Sharifi. Elizabeth did quite a great introduction, and so I don't think we need to say much more there. But both of us do have, an HR background as well. We're PhD candidates in the HRM department at York University. So just to get started, I want to introduce you with a poll. Maybe you could first tell me what you know about endometriosis. Do you yourself potentially have endometriosis? Do you know someone who has it? Maybe you've done your own research, or perhaps you don't know much about the condition and that's why you're here. This is anonymous, and if you're comfortable, you can include the answer now. The findings at a societal level, typically there's only about 20 to 30% of people that actually know about the condition as it currently stands. So perhaps we have different results than the general broad population. Just to give you some indication of what research was previously out there, only in the past couple years was a recent article detracted, and they were apologizing for it because, unbeknownst to the patients with the condition, women were being rated on their level of attractiveness by doctors. So this is the type of research that we have out there when it comes to endometriosis. And only in the past 10 to 15 years has it really become more widely acknowledged. And now we're starting to see people discuss about the condition and the fact that they probably had these symptoms for quite some time. Also, many women had these symptoms and didn't even know that this is the condition that they possessed. So I just want to also get started and talk about this book that I thought was particularly interesting related to this topic. This is a book called Ask Me About My Uterus. It's by Abby Norman. Abby Norman is a woman who discusses her journey related to endometriosis. She was a dancer and she received a scholarship to go to university. During her undergraduate degree, she discusses when she first started to see symptoms of endometriosis, in which she had extremely debilitating pain that she described it being like a knife inside of her, felt like stabbing. It resulted in multiple hospitalizations, in which at most sometimes doctors would give her Advil and tell her to be on her way. Oftentimes they told her that it was psychological and perhaps if she got mental health treatment that it would be treated. This resulted in her being absent from a lot of her classes and not being able to perform. She lost her scholarship, and she talks about this journey throughout her career, having struggles being able to perform in the workplace. Only when her then boyfriend came to with her to the doctors were they actually starting to believe that yes, maybe some of these symptoms are in fact abnormal. And she becomes her own teacher, in which she pursues a job in a hospital so she could get the resources to start to learn about the condition. Now, this type of story is not rare. There's many people who have a similar history of being misbelieved, not being able to perform despite really wanting to be able to function in the workplace. Now, to start with what endometriosis really is, it's a disease in which the tissue that's similar to the lining of the uterus grows outside of the uterus. Now, the tissue might be seen in different places. It could appear in the ovaries, the fallopian tube, perhaps the pelvic cavity, and depending on where it's located, the symptoms may vary. The symptoms typically involve pelvic pain, infertility, nausea, chronic fatigue, painful periods, frequent and painful defecation and urination, among many other factors. Now, there are different levels of severity, but oftentimes this pain is quite severe. Sometimes it will be strictly when women have their period. However, 40% of the time it could also occur outside of that window. Now, there is one quote that I found particularly interesting. It was from the Australian government, in which they conducted a study on endometriosis. And one woman with this condition noted it's a disease that slowly destroys your body, your social life, relationships, dreams of becoming a mother, careers, work, financial stability, self-esteem, ability to function normally, ability to parent fully, and your mental state. Now, this condition impacts as many as 10% of women of reproductive age, and it first started being seen approximately 160 years ago. However, there really isn't much of a cure. Now, it's an interesting condition in that it sits at the intersection of gender and invisible illness, both of which carry their own stigma, and oftentimes women that complain about such symptoms are deemed chronic complainers. The cost of endometriosis is quite significant. One study about 15 years ago found that it cost the Canadian society about $2 billion, and that's only increased in recent times. In a 2020 study, they found that it costs $30 million Canadian per year in hospital related expenses. Now, women often might see 4, 5, 6 plus doctors before actually receiving any sort of diagnosis. On average, it takes 7 years from the time that they first go to a doctor to receive a diagnosis. Some women have reported up to 20 years of going to doctors. And as I said before, this is not a broadly known condition societally. Only 20 to 30% of the general public are actually aware of endometriosis.
Thank you, Marlee. Hi, everyone. And so actually, everything that Marlee shared on top of this, the initial answers you provided in your polls is very interesting because really what we see from our research is that there's just such a huge misunderstanding around this health condition. So it's really wonderful to see in many ways that you are all aware and recognize this condition and probably actually why you're here. But in general, one of the biggest challenges, as we can see, it's incredibly costly for individuals with regard to their health, their emotional state, and also for the broader economic market, right? So why is this happening? And in part, it really has to do with just our general education around women's health. And so what we see as a recurring theme and feedback from so many individuals suffering from endometriosis is that it's difficult to understand what these symptoms are, what they're going through, because they have such little understanding of their own bodies and a misunderstanding about, what it means to be going through life in a normal way, and when something is not so right or not so normal that's happening in your body. And so it would just be so much better this way to understand, to get this education, to be able to advocate for yourself when you start experiencing symptoms that are telling you something isn't quite right. And this really has to do with just the general inadequate attention that we pay to women's health. And on top of that, instead, what we do is we really just emphasize women's sexuality, which is really very harmful to how we're able to understand, diagnose, and support women as they experience endometriosis and other health conditions. And ultimately, what we can sort of chalk this up to is that there's just so much misogyny that's rooted in so much of our healthcare system, which spills over into our places of work, as we'll talk about. So we're very curious. We would love to hear again from you around sort of what your thoughts are around this misunderstanding. So yes, we are in the year 2025, but sometimes it really doesn't feel like it. And so as Marlee shared, there's all these circumstances that are taking place leading to this misunderstanding. But what do you think? Do you agree, or do you have other thoughts? We'd love to hear it.
I'll just read them out. So I have doctors are not trained in women's health issues adequately. They receive information on studies that only looked at male health issues, and then therefore women's bodies are misunderstood. The other another answer is male-focused healthcare, a lack of research, and then lack of studies on women's health. Mostly they focus on men. Most studies didn't go far enough to include women's health. So a lot of themes there. And then finally, we need a national action plan. Doctors are not paid enough.
Yeah, these are all really excellent points, and exactly I think what Marlee and I are seeing in this research is a lack of attention towards women and women's bodies and women's health, or in a way that really is meaningful, and an emphasis on what men are going through, and then sort of assessing women in comparison to men's health. Hence why we have this huge gap. Yeah. And that this actually brings us, and thank you everyone for sharing, because absolutely all of these components, including having more of a national focus on supporting doctors, are all part of this issue. And of course, there's so many factors, but one that I think we see a lot of and sort of has created a catalyst for this is the medical gaslighting that women have gone throughout history. In particular, for all of you individuals who identify as women, may have heard or had this said to you that you're hysterical, right? So hysterical being that you're overly dramatic or emotional, or you're not very accurate about the way that you are experiencing any of your health symptoms, right? When you go to the doctor, just to calm down. And hysteria, which basically originates from this Greek word of hystera, meaning uterus, sort of has reinforced this long held belief that women's health challenges are only tied to the reproductive organs, and that we are just unable to very logically understand what it is that we're going through, and so we're often disbelieved when we claim pain or any type of challenge with our health. And so what happened then with endometriosis, in line with this hysteria, is that it was basically labeled a career women's disease because it was discovered for women who were undergoing surgery during infertility. And so, unfortunately, sort of how it came to be was that while women were trying to pursue careers and enter the workforce, it was assumed that endometriosis was that outcome instead of them prioritizing having children and having a family. It was sort of this idea that women were experiencing endometriosis because they just weren't focusing on their on childcare instead. And so it ended up becoming a condition that was delegitimized and just labeled as just a bad period, right? As something that really was not as dramatic as women were making it out to be. And so, as Marlee mentioned earlier, there still is no cure for this condition, despite the number of women it impacts. And the treatment options are quite ineffective. They're on a trial and error sort of basis. And as we've sort of learned, reading up about the different women that are experiencing it, is that they've taken alternative routes at times, or just sometimes completely given up on the possibility of a resolution. So this is really a big reason why this misunderstanding continues to perpetuate. So Marlee, back over to you.
Great. So it has been found that as many as 1/6 of women with this condition end up dropping out of their jobs. They are simply feel as though they are not properly supported. They don't have the means to go into work every day. They don't have the resources that will allow them to thrive in the workplace. We looked at interviews from one study from the Endometriosis Network of Canada, in which one individual said, "I no longer manage a team of people. I'm earning 1/3 less than I was before. I've had to sell my house and move to a cheaper area to free up some money to pay my bills." So we see this quite a lot, where women are forced to modify their career path. They may choose a job in which they are able to perform, where they don't have to manage people. Perhaps they don't have to go into the workplace. But there's also those that try to maintain their job, and they take specific steps to reduce the stigmatization. Leads to a decision of whether they choose to disclose their condition in the workplace. Again, we look through interviews, but this time through Reddit, in which individuals post about their condition. And there's one woman who said it quite eloquently. "In an ideal world, we would talk about our condition openly, but real life is not so pretty, and upper management will always have their eye out to see if you are an asset to them. Even the nicest appearing companies will still be concerned about their bottom line. Perhaps you can get lucky with an understanding boss, but once you let people know these things, you can't take it back." This leads to a difficult balance between deciding whether to disclose or conceal. If they disclose, perhaps they are able to be their authentic selves, perhaps they're able to receive proper accommodations in some workplaces, but that also comes with the stigma. On the other hand, perhaps they choose not to disclose, and that might reduce stigma, but then they perhaps don't have the accommodations necessary to thrive, and they do not feel as though they're being their true selves in the workplace. Many women, therefore, decide to not disclose in full. They might feel as though the symptoms are embarrassing. They're aware of the stigma that comes with it. And oftentimes, women on average are more what we refer to as relationally conscious, in which they don't want others to feel uncomfortable. We often see too partial disclosure, where individuals will disclose on a must need basis, perhaps only getting a doctor's note that says that they cannot be on work for these specific days. There was one study in women in higher level positions where they found when they had to disclose, they did so trying to emphasize the positive aspects and downplaying the effect that it truly had on them. Now, there are many common stereotypes that exist in the workplace that contribute to the stigmatization. And we're going to discuss in detail how perhaps we might be able to tackle these in the workplace. But one of the common stereotypes is that it's just a bad period. Many people feel, everybody has cramps or everybody, has their period. Um, it's not such a big deal. In fact, this is quite painful and it's a systemic condition. It's not just typical cramps. Another common stereotype might be that people feel as though you're overreacting, and women are often dismissed as exaggerating. We hear about, the hysteria element that we discussed earlier. As well, there is a stereotype that comes with any invisible illness as well, where you don't look sick. Because people don't see it, they do not, in fact, see how much people are, in fact, suffering. And this is common as well in our own studies. When we bring up that we are doing endometriosis research, people who seem as though they're completely healthy come to us and will tell us their stories. Another thing that we've oftentimes heard, and I'm sure many of you have heard as well, that pain is normal for women. Period cramps are normal. And in fact, some cramps are normal, but you should not be suffering from debilitating pain to the point that you have to be bedridden for days at a time without proper support. Now, another common stereotype is you're simply too stressed or anxious. We see that women are often blamed and they say that it is psychosomatic symptoms, that it's all in their head. And if they were to get mental health support, that it would all be cured. Now, this is not a psychological condition, it's a physical condition. And in fact, endometriosis may cause some mental health concerns due to the fact, oftentimes, that they are experiencing extreme pain, forced to suffer in silence, trying to balance work and home life and other aspects, but it is a physical condition. Now, one more poll. I wanted you to maybe help me understand, what would you think of a person that might experience these traits, where they call in sick for period pain, they say they have brain fog, and that perhaps they say they have heavy bleeding at work? How would you think of this person? And again, this is anonymous, so you can be truthful.
Okay, so there's a little bit of a question within the thoughts of this of is there in fact a mental health component? So maybe Tina and Marlee, you can address that after I run through these other answers. I think the honest answer is it feels like an exaggeration, but I also disagree with this opinion or judgment that immediately comes to mind. So maybe some internal dialogue going on there. They are not healthy and their medical condition is impacting their ability to work consistently. Women's health concerns are legitimate. And then a final one of I would feel sad for that person and I would try to be as flexible as possible.
Right. So first, with the first question, there are some comorbidities, both physical and psychological. This is not a condition that's in your head, though. There are some symptoms that could lead to later, depression and anxious symptoms. However, this is all something physical. It's about the lining in the tissue. So I think a lot of people have been introduced to this condition, and many people who have gone to the doctor and talked about this condition have been told perhaps they had bad experiences in the past that led them to have these feelings, and perhaps they have to address those. That is not the case. I mean, of course, you should address your mental health, and of course, there might be symptoms that you could, help treat if it's something that you are mentally suffering from it, but that will not make the symptoms of endometriosis go away. The other factors that we discussed, where some people said that they have an initial, perhaps, feel some initial judgment of a person that is coming with these symptoms. That is commonly discussed. I think it's been so ingrained in our mind to think that women should just have to force through and suffer through the pain. And there are a lot of studies, and as well from some of my own interviews with people with similar conditions, having a mentor that's a woman, or as well having a boss that's a woman, sometimes has really helped. But in many cases, women won't discuss these symptoms, especially when they have, a male boss. They simply don't feel comfortable.
And this sort of brings us to this idea of what we can do within organizations, whether we are leaders, stakeholders, decision makers, or we are the ones asking these leaders, stakeholders, and decision makers to make changes around, working with and supporting individuals that are managing their endometriosis while they're trying to advance their professional careers. And I really like I like all of the comments, but one particular statement that came through the last poll was legitimacy, right? That these experiences are legitimate. And this is fundamentally one of the biggest issues, is that women do not feel like their experiences are legitimate, and they don't feel like they belong in the workplace for that reason. And this also contributes greatly to that psychological distress of, you are told over and over again, it's in your head and this pain isn't real or it's exaggerated. You doubt yourself, and it creates conflict within yourself that creates all of these potential mental health challenges as well. And so this is why it's so important to develop and build organizational support, which we hope will actually spill over again into broader society as well. But one, again, common theme and feedback from women around, hey, how can we support you as you're managing your endometriosis, was the response around just understanding this condition better, recognizing that it's legitimate, that it is real. And so, as one individual very poignantly stated, and I think many of us know who, when it comes to pain, that when women are suffering, it takes we have a very high threshold for pain first. And so when we are speaking up and saying, please help, it's quite serious at this point. And in particular with endometriosis, it's a silent and very invisible illness. So women are dealing with this pain just internally, and they're not saying a lot. They're not disclosing in fear of, so many judgments and everything that sort of comes with it. And we want to dismantle that and remove that, so women don't have to take on so much pain and then reach a high threshold where they can't do it anymore. So this is a really important piece for organizations to address. And a big emphasis is that we understand that many people are so well intended, whether it's colleagues or leaders, they want to help. When it comes to supporting individuals with endometriosis, they just don't have the knowledge. And so it starts there, education and recognition, and then we can sort of build from there. And so we actually came across different organizations that are doing some really great work around this already, supporting individuals with endometriosis. So AO, which is this UK-based online retailer, for example, has appointed endometriosis champions, and they've built educational resources and raised awareness by building employer training and policy development. And very importantly, they've promoted and developed these workplace adjustment programs and practices. So to create this flexibility around work, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Oregon and Canada is another great example. They have this Her Professional Journey initiative where they've introduced flexible work arrangements. So they're coming in different hours, being able to, leave, when maybe the pain isn't so great, and continuing to do the work at home, customized leave policies, women's health mentorships, as Marlee was mentioning. So many individuals going through this, especially when they're invisible illnesses, really benefit from having mentors and individuals who understand them and who can support them. And dedicated wellness rooms, which we're all quite familiar with because we've introduced them for other benefit-related reasons in the workplace. And of course, that all brings together this education and awareness that can be so helpful for managing this condition in the workplace. And so as Marlee was going through these stereotypes, we wanted to introduce them because I think understanding these is really important for us to be able to tackle them and then build out resources, recommendations, and future policies and practices to dismantle these challenges. And so we want to bring them back just very quickly. So I hope I'm not too repetitive, but to sort of build these initiatives, we have to sort of understand these stereotypes a little bit further, so that, the one we mentioned a lot is it's just a bad period. And this is a significant misconception because endometriosis is not the same as regular menstruation pain. They're two different things. They have some commonalities at times, but endometriosis is a chronic condition, and menstrual pain is something completely different. And again, this goes back to people not having a full knowledge or understanding between the two, because it relates to women's health, something that, as we discussed, we don't have a lot of knowledge on all the time. So what can we do? We can build greater awareness and develop education initiatives. So training and workshops is a great way to do it. Just have, for example, healthcare professionals and consultants come to the workplace and just build out a day to share what is menstrual pain versus what is endometriosis, and cover that with leaders and just generally the workforce altogether. Have those health and wellness campaigns. So maybe just disseminating internal newsletters and HR bulletins for people to have, brochures and pamphlets to read on, so they can refer back. And it just gives the opportunity for us to learn a little bit more on a day-to-day basis.
Combat the stereotype of you're overreacting. First, what's really important is that it's a top-down initiative where we really need leadership and HR training. First, there should be some empathy and bias reduction training, right? Like even when we first did that poll where we talk about, well, what would you think of this type of person? We have to acknowledge our initial thoughts and perhaps sometimes our initial judgments. It's also important that individuals have the ability to have anonymous reporting channels. Some people might not be comfortable discussing their condition. Some people might not want to tell their employer, might not feel as though it's a workplace conducive to that. Allowing people the ability to report instances of perhaps being dismissive or perhaps suggestions, perhaps a suggestion box where they can discuss potential tools to support them in the workplace. Another thing that we identified is having the opportunity to work with an occupational health nurse or a disability management specialist. Now, this can be external or internal. They can support identifying functional limitations, return to work plans, drafting of policies, ensuring ergonomic adjustments, offering mental health support, anything that would help such women improve their overall day-to-day functioning in the workplace.
And the third stereotype is you don't look sick, which is surrounding this invisible illness stigma, right? We can't see endometriosis. And of course, women try their best to look polished and professional, right? Like they're okay to work. So they often get this sort of comment which devalues what they're going through. And a really great solution around this is to have policies in place and workplace support. So this can include flexible work options and just confirming some great HR policies around this so that we can offer remote work or flexible hours for employees with invisible illnesses. So if we can't, just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening, doesn't mean that individuals aren't suffering. And so these policies will be documented. So they're explicitly stating that, hey, those with non-visible conditions can, for example, take this time off or work from home maybe an extra day than standard employees, because we recognize sort of the challenges around this. And of course, the wellness, rest, and recovery spaces are always helpful. These are just quiet rooms to take some time and space in case, there's painful flare-ups that are happening, and they can just, get some reprieve that way. And also another solution would be a medical accommodation passport. So this would be a confidential document because, again, disclosure is so tricky and can be very scary, rightfully so, for individuals to be out and very, open about what they're going through. So maybe just between themselves and the HR team and maybe their leader, maybe it doesn't even have to involve their leader, to get approved accommodations, like you have some more flexible start times or extra breaks or access to quiet spaces, again, just to acknowledge that, hey, we see you, we acknowledge, and we're making sure that you know that we see your condition as something that is legitimate. And that, I think, speaks to the employee in a really meaningful way. And of course, nothing can, be complete without more collective support and having community. So when you have, for example, an employee-led chronic illness support group, this would not only bring individuals with endometriosis together, but PCOS and other invisible illnesses, because so many of these experiences relate, and it can create a sense of community and maybe help with people feeling more of that sense of belongingness, and also more strength and courage to speak up, and strength in numbers. So this is something that could be really beneficial for everyone.
To combat the stereotype that pain is normal for women, again, education, very important. We have to work on workplace gender bias training and also offer diverse medical leave coverage. Interestingly, when I interviewed individuals, a lot of them talked about the fact that while they were working from home during the pandemic, this is when they worked their best. They finally were able to wear clothes that didn't hurt, like with a comfy waistline, to take breaks when they needed to feel comfortable when they were in pain, and therefore giving that flexibility is a great opportunity for them. Now, another factor is menstrual leave policies. Now, some countries are already doing that. For example, Japan and Korea have done this for quite some time, but typically that's 1 day of unpaid leave. In Spain, recently, there was an introduction to a menstrual leave policy as well, where women could get, if it was excruciating pain, up to 5 days per month. This has to come with a doctor's note. Unfortunately, a lot of these policies are not broadly used, they've found, and of course, that's due to stigma. So that's also something that we do have to combat. As it currently stands in Canada, though, this is up to every employer. It's not instated at a federal level.
We'll wrap this last stereotype up, but you're just stressed or you're anxious. So again, this goes back to this hysteria component of the pain is in your head, you're simply just too emotional. Something we hear not just about pain, but in many respects in the workplace, unfortunately, still. And so the solution would be to have mental health and holistic support, because well, as Marlee was sharing, it doesn't impact you directly from a mental health perspective, this condition. The outcomes of that, of the condition itself and the misunderstanding does. So employee assistance programs are a great way to address this. So providing counseling, mental health support for employees managing just generally chronic illnesses, and employee resource groups, again, going back to having a community, having a collective, dedicated, safe spaces for individuals who identify as women to connect, to share experiences. So even if women aren't all going through chronic health conditions, we share so many of the same experiences in many ways around the workplace, which frankly isn't always very accommodating to us as a general rule. So having sort of this coalition is so important. And we cannot, move forward without leadership training for chronic conditions. And this may actually connect very well to one of the comments about how do we build management training or empathy or sensitivity training in relation to disability. And it starts, I think, with leadership. So leaders need to maybe have this run by HR, maybe have these professionals that come in that understand these conditions and understand the human rights legislation to come in and sort of build out these programs so they understand it, and in turn can model that behavior, and then on top of that give that same type of training to your employees, because again, to legitimize that this is a condition that is to be taken seriously. So we have a brainstorming session that sort of follows with all of this. So in consideration of all these stereotypes that we've sort of discussed and shared, and just really everything that we've talked about so far, we want to see if you guys want to engage with us around an action plan for more inclusive policies and workplace allyship. So actually some of the questions that are asked here are really great places also to start brainstorming some solutions. So if you want to take a few minutes to reflect on everything based on what we've discussed, what recommendations do you have? Do you like some of the things we've recommended, or do you just see that's not really feasible since you are right now on the ground in these workplaces, or maybe even administering these policies? What is it that you think can help better support women in the workplace to thrive at their full potential? And what are some of the strategies you think that could make sense?
So I know that we've gone through these stereotypes and have had some wonderful, thoughts and ways to support. But we have a little bit of a specific question here on what do you think an appropriate accommodation would be when attendance is being impacted on a regular basis? This is something that has come up quite often across different, perhaps conditions or reasons. And there has been accommodation through unpaid time off, reduction to part time, ability to work from home when symptoms are exacerbated, but thinking about helping and supporting women in their career trajectories. And then, when they aren't present or able to work and how that can kind of backtrack things for them or not support them in that way. So just looking for your thoughts on that topic. And if I need to repeat anything, because I know that was long, let me know.
So, I mean, a big part that stands out to me is just having the flexibility. Especially as I said before, there's many women who reported that they feel as though they can perform better when they're working at home. Sometimes, perhaps giving them, judging them based on their results and not by their attendance in the office. Um, you know, each person will have different symptoms when it relates to this condition, so it's hard to give a one broad solution for endometriosis in general. Each person will need unique accommodations, but there is definitely an obstacle in terms of if they are, working from home, if they are taking a lot of time, that will in fact impact their career progression, and we've seen that. So I think it's a very much a focus now, as we're seeing in some workplaces, on the results rather than inconsequential aspects of their job that perhaps they can perform when they have the capacity to, when they can work from home, perhaps after hours or on weekends, whenever they're able to actually do their job, that they can do so.
That's a great point. That doesn't get talked to quite a bit of in terms of being flexible, just even outside of work hours and allowing, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. You're feeling great. Let's utilize those options. And I think it comes to mind for me a bit of a follow up. And I know the chat has gone very fiery, which is exciting. So we'll get to that in a minute. But just an overall follow up question to that is even starting these conversations, or perhaps you've tried to have these conversations before and just the barriers are so high or leadership is not ready to listen or take these on. Can you speak to supporting people that are looking to try or have tried and are still having trouble getting these conversations started and seeing these values in work in different ways?
I think it really starts then with leadership first, because I we see this a lot in terms of when you're trying to negotiate with your leader to understand and legitimize your experiences. If they don't really truly understand what it is that you're going through, there's always going to be a block. And I think this is where it has to start from the top. We know organizational culture is developed by leadership and then trickled down through, the leadership team below. So that's where you have to make it ingrained into your culture, more than anything. This is where policies are so important. It's not just enough to have individuals advocate for themselves, right? Because that onus of responsibility is so heavy. It's such a burden. But to start from the top and say, how can we build a culture? Is this going to be part of our strategic objective, not just to, make sure we hit our profits and, ensure XYZ, but what kind of culture do we want to provide a climate for our employees? And maybe one of them is just surrounding flexible work. And so flexible work can mean so many different things. So when I see the comments here, leadership support and leadership recognition brings everything together. And so when the leader has an understanding, has more familiarity, that conversation can be much more eased into. And also that sort of touches on this flexibility piece around, well, if I'm missing work and I'm working 7 to 9 and no one sees it, how can I get promoted? Well, your leader would know, and then they would be able to recognize and give you a shout out, or give you recognition to their boss when it comes to promotions, because that's often what's missing, or people are doing the work, but they're not getting recognized. And this is a classic issue that women go through because they're doing the caretaking with kids and with elder care, and that requires them to, not be able to be as available as men sometimes. So the same sort of sentiment, but this is why it's so important to start with leadership, ensure they understand, and then have it trickle through. So you, as the person advocating for yourself, are not climbing this completely uphill battle.
There's something else that I wanted to add to that as well. When I was doing some interviews with people with different conditions, there was one woman in which I was speaking to, and she had cancer, and she was discussing how supportive her workplace was. I think that's largely due to the fact that people understand cancer. People understand and start to see you lose your hair and factors like that. It's a lot of a misunderstanding, and again, just not knowing about endometriosis. So I truly believe if we start by education, that makes a huge difference in how you treat women with such conditions.
I mean, there's definitely a theme of education even in the comments that we have here, and from kind of looking at these, and I know you've spoken to it a little generally of like having these educations, the training, the workshops, learning yourself, all of those things. What it to me it's speaking to in the comments is people actually aren't sure where to go. So there might be a desire to learn more or have these educational resources, or maybe in a suggestion box or survey or something, someone is putting up their hand and saying, let's talk about this. But do you have kind of specific recommendations or resources? We can always include it in post communications as well, of just where can people go to kind of have something at the ready when an education opportunity arises.
Yes, actually, I can share that with you later. One is a great one
Wonderful.
that first comes to mind because we've done some work with them is the Endometriosis Network of Canada. They have some really great resources and contacts that you could reach out to. But there are others as well that could help to support you, and I'm glad to forward that along.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so there's sorry, quite a few comments here, so I'm just catching up for a second. Um, so yes, a workplace culture that is understanding, accommodating, and flexible results, starting with leadership. It trickles down into the team and results if people and result in better employee retention. Since employment onboarding is one of the highest costs to the employer, being accommodating and/or flexible actually improves the business's bottom line. This is the business perspective to support businesses with understanding why accommodations are important, the human factor, including mindedness and being a supportive leader because people matter, is a real reason this should be implemented. So I'm thinking that's a bit a part of that brainstorm activity up on the screen. So that's a wonderful summation in my perspective, but anything that you want to share in that, Tina and Marlee?
I think if there's ever room for this, and this relates to just having resources to read on and watch videos around, is just also offering employees the opportunity to share their stories. So I know, and I've been part of organizations that have done things like fireside chats. And this surrounds whether they've done discussions on various DEI topics, even of, how they came to this country as immigrants, for example, or experiences as women in the workplace. So introducing that maybe from a chronic health condition perspective of, if employees feel safe, and again, this goes back to having a psychologically safe environment where you can come and talk about it. But as an add-on, I think one way that we really resonate and learn from each other and really deeply understand something is through storytelling. And so I think this is an excellent way, probably for individuals to be able to be more open about what they're going through, and for their colleagues to understand them. So I know this is sort of a later thing, but we need to get the basics. But I think even just having the opportunity to have these conversations really relates to it. And I think that just came to mind because of the comment about the human factor and the idea that people matter. We get so swept up with work that we forget we're working with human beings, with lives. And so we are bringing those lives into the workplace every day. And it's important to acknowledge them, especially when they're impacting how we're able to show up at work.
It's interesting because, we've done a lot of research where we look at Reddit, and it's
Yeah.
such a useful tool to see it because this is a place where people can actually talk to one another about the condition when they really feel that they don't have anybody else to talk to. having support groups where people might not have the same conditions, but they're still struggling. PCOS might not be the same thing, but there's some overlap and there's still consistencies and, how people are experiencing it. Having those groups where people feel as though they can speak to one another is very therapeutic. They also offer resources to one another, and it really is effective.
It's social support, peer support, it comes up again and again, right? In quite a lot of different, as you mentioned, it cannot be all the same chronic conditions, but those similarities, those shared stories, the storytelling aspect of human nature is such a powerful tool. And that brings up for me a couple of things. One of the main points that you kind of said in passing, but really caught my ear, is this relational causation. So when it comes from the female perspective, and maybe being hesitant to join that group or share your story because you're feeling, oh, what if that's making someone else uncomfortable or something like that? Or from the other side, maybe the leader is like, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And now, like, I've asked them something. Now I'm in the, like, kind of just talking to those maybe awkward moments that maybe people are not saying the thing because they're worried about doing the wrong thing or making someone uncomfortable.
I think there's just a element of humility. We're saying to somebody, I don't understand and I'm trying to understand and I'm sympathizing with you. And if I'm saying something that makes you uncomfortable, let me know. As a leader, goes a long way. Most people that you're going, if you talk about this condition, they're not going to understand what you're going through. But having somebody that's willing to listen and say, well, how can we work together to offer accommodations goes a long way. When I interview women and have asked them, what made you disclose? It's often the organizational culture. And that's simply what it comes down to, whether they feel as though it's an environment that's conducive to this type of support. They might not disclose everything, but they feel as though they're comfortable and their job won't be on the line when they talk about it.
Absolutely. That psychological safety and inclusive, open culture is just such a key point here. Another theme that I was just seeing going through the chats from a little bit earlier is a little bit of the policy side, but kind of larger policy, not organizational, but actually like looking at human rights code, employment laws, and a specific mention of Motion 52 and duty to accommodate, like all of those things. There is a factor here that maybe we can speak to a little bit because perhaps maybe there's also confusion of, is this a disability? Is this not? What are my rights? What is the employer responsibility? So if we can maybe just speak to that before we wrap on today's session, that would be wonderful.
In more extreme cases, it has in fact been classified as a disability. Though, that again, it's kind of new territories, and sometimes that's an obstacle that you have to take on as a person with the condition. There is, in fact, a duty to accommodate, especially if they have proper documentation from their doctors. The problem being sometimes women are not going to their doctors about these types of conditions. Sometimes, again, as I said, if they're going to 4 to 6 doctors and still not feeling as though they're trusted, a lot of them give up. And that's a challenge too, right? Because then technically, how do they get those accommodations legally? That's a challenge also that we have to tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. So just continued conversation. And I think there are, a little bit of self-advocacy component here as well, which is not always maybe what everyone wants to hear, as it's another thing that is on the individual. But hopefully today's conversation has hopefully opened the door for many people to maybe take that next step, go to that, next doctor's appointment to try and advocate a little bit more, or open the conversation in their next team meeting or human resources meeting or education session. So I just so appreciate the opportunity for opening this kind of conversation, bringing forward such a needed presentation topic to our audience. And thank you to the audience who have been wonderful in participating and sharing experiences and thoughts. And that doesn't have to stop here by any means. As mentioned, Tina and Marlee are very open to continuing the conversation. There'll be an evaluation survey that if you haven't quite typed out your thoughts or need some more time to reflect, you can answer them there, or email us and continue this conversation. So just before we wrap up, Tina, Marlee, is there anything else you'd like to leave our audience with today of kind of where you'd like to see moving forward, or what your hopes are for people leaving the session today?
Well, first, I'd like to say I hope you can contact us if you have any thoughts. These are our emails. You could also contact us on LinkedIn. I just hope also this is getting the conversation started. I've been really happy to see in more recent years that there's articles being published that really that wasn't the case a decade ago, when a lot of people might have in my age group have started to experience symptoms. I also hope, that we can keep this conversation going and offer more actionable insights, because as it currently stands, there really is not a lot of research out there that identifies what we actually can do and what is proven to be effective. Tina, do you have anything else to say?
No, just first, thank you everyone for participating and sharing your thoughts and your questions and feedback. Yeah, as Marlee said, it's really important just to have these conversations. And maybe one last piece that's really important is, if you're not going through endometriosis yourself and you're starting to learn about it and recognize, how difficult it is, to be that ally and be that advocate for someone else who may feel so burdened by just advocating for themselves. So again, strength in numbers. So if, as leaders or just as colleagues, whether it's just helpful support or actually coming in and stepping in for somebody or echoing something that your colleague is asking for in terms of accommodations, flexibility, be that person for them. Because, yeah, it's definitely self-advocacy is unfortunately a thing that has to be done, but it doesn't mean it's the only solution. And sometimes just little pieces of support from a colleague, a leader, can go such a long way in helping sort of pave the way for incremental change. But thank you all. This was a lot of fun and really, really insightful.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tina and Marlee. I know we've come to the hour. We're actually slightly over the hour. So thank you to everyone for staying on with us. And so a final thank you to our audience for being so wonderful and participating and spending your time with us today, as well as, of course, Tina and Marlee. Thank you so much for being here and being our leaders in conversation and expertise today as well.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Continue to learn and connect with the Work Wellness Institute and see how we're transforming research into workplace performance and health at www.workwellnessinstitute.org.